Good morning. Welcome back to the Retirement Report. I'm Hank Parrott, your host. All right, we're going to get into a program that I covered with you in, I think it was last week when we got into taxes in retirement. But it covers a lot more than that. It covers about how to take money from your accounts as well, how to grow your money. All of that's covered in this. The first slide is on qualified money versus non-qualified money. It's very important to understand what accounts, what resources you're going to have available, and how best to use those resources to both reduce taxes as well as to make sure that you sustain the income that you need, that you're able to not only attain the income, you know, this is part of it. I talk about maintaining your current standard of living. Well, that's the foundation. We start there. We say, okay, we need to maintain our current standard of living. This is how much I spend now to do the things I enjoy doing. And then we talk about attaining maybe a higher amount. And this is what we're talking about, attaining a certain standard of living. In retirement, it's about fun money. It's about having money now for things that we didn't have the time for, or maybe didn't, mainly it's time, of course, and then we retire, and now we've got the time and all that money that we've been saving, now we're able to draw down on that to be able to sustain our standard of living, and again, to add in some fun money, some additional monies just for discretionary spending, just for leisure type activities, for instance, things maybe with family, whatever that might be for you. So most of us are going to be relying on our qualified money. Many times you might also have non-qualified. Non-qualified and qualified, what that means is this. Qualified money is tax qualified, meaning it's in some type of a retirement account, a 401k, 403b, 457, TSP, Thrift Savings Plan for you federal employees and military. Do a lot of work with federal employees. You got a whole different set of rules and complexities basically that go with your retirement planning, with the way your pensions work, how Social Security works for you, a number of other areas. A lot of times maybe you may be in one of those types of jobs, military and that, where you have to retire earlier. So how your planning is even more important that it's done correctly. All right, now the other retirement accounts, of course, IRAs, SEP IRAs, understanding the difference between traditional IRAs and Roth IRAs, how those work. All of that all those retirement accounts fall under qualified money. Non-qualified would just be regular savings or investments or brokerage accounts that you've accumulated over the years that are not in a retirement account. All right. Understanding the qualified money is going to be taxable then when you start taking distributions, whereas your non-qualified money, you're going to get taxed on it each year based on to a certain degree. You're going to have maybe dividends, interest, possibly some capital gains that you're going to be paying on each year, depending on the amount of trading activity and how much you're pulling down and stuff as to what that might be. So that's taxable each year. Now you can also build up capital gains within those non-qualified accounts, and we're going to talk about how that is real important. Understanding the capital gains rules, those tax rules can again help you reduce your taxable the tax that you're going to pay on your income in retirement. Okay, so real important to understand those rules. And then talking about safety, of course, when it comes to your investing. And then also once you're retired, right, you're no longer putting money in, so you can't add money to your accounts to make up for market losses. So you got to keep it you got to be a little smarter with how you invest, which is why I stress modern portfolio theory and how to, in fact, utilize that to minimize volatility in retirement, which is going to help you dramatically when it comes to protecting yourself against that sequence of returns risk I mentioned. All right. Common questions that we get into. All right, this is for baby boomers about qualified money. So this is getting into those retirement accounts. When do you need to take withdrawals? All right, so depending on your situation and when you retire and what other resources you may have, this all goes into play as far as when you need to take withdrawals from your accounts and how much do you have to take. Now this another part, of course, is what are called required minimum distributions. So first, you don't want to touch your IRAs in that until you're over 59 and a half. Now, ideally, depending on your situation and when you retire, we develop plans to help you as far as making sure, because you'd have, if you take it out before 59 and a half, there's a 10% penalty. Now, if you're one of those fortunate few that retire a little earlier, maybe in your mid-50s, then we balance out keeping some money in a 401k and taking income from it to get you past that 59 and a half date, since you can take money from a 401k after you leave the employer after age 55 without that 10% penalty. So there are ways that you can, again, structure your income needs around, but you need to understand the rules so you don't have the penalties. How are your withdrawals taxed from your IRAs, 401ks, other retirement accounts? And of course, they're going to be taxed at ordinary income tax rates. This gets into a whole nother level of strategies as far as how I want to take money from those accounts, how I invest. Okay, if I've got non-qualified money, for instance, and qualified money, there's tax-efficient ways to invest to minimize those taxes, and it's understanding these rules to get there. So I'll give you an example I've talked about before on the show. If I've got half my money in if I've got, let's say, $100,000, I'll just use easy numbers. If I've got $100,000 in a non-qualified account, and just a regular brokerage account, and $100,000 in an IRA account, and I've got them both invested at 50-50 stocks and bonds, then understanding the rules, okay? Bonds are taxed at ordinary income tax rates, all right, just as IRA distributions are. Whereas stocks, equities, are going to be taxed at long-term capital gains rate as long as they're held for over 12 months. So therefore, I want to put my equities, right? I want to weight my stocks to be more heavily in my non-qualified account, right? And I want to have my bonds in my IRAs, in my qualified accounts. That way, ordinary income tax rates either way on bonds and IRAs, whereas I can get long-term capital gains rates on the equity non-qualified side, which basically means I could potentially pay zero tax. Imagine that. I put it in stocks as in my IRA and I pull it out, I don't get the capital gains treatment, I pay ordinary income tax rates. I have it in a non-qualified account, I get capital gains rates, and depending on my income, maybe pay zero tax. That's huge. All right, one might be a 12 to 15% tax, and the other zero tax. So, again, a great way, understanding the rules and utilizing them. And now that was a very simple example I just used. You can utilize the same principle in a lot more complex way if you get into, of course, because you're going to have accounts typically that are, you might have $1 million, for instance, in your retirement accounts and only a few $100,000 in non-qualified accounts. So how to balance those things out. You may have some Roth IRAs, then how to balance that piece in. All of this is important because then we weight, meaning we put a certain amount of equities and bonds in your portfolio, in your different accounts, based on what's also going to give you the most tax efficiency, in other words, minimize taxes in the process. All right, how are your IRA 401k withdrawals taxed? We just talked about ordinary income tax rates. How do they fit into your overall plan? And that goes into, the more resources you have available. We weigh all those things in determining then when is the best, or which account and when would be the best time to take from that account to supplement your income. And a lot of times we're blending things. It's not, sometimes we hear these rules about which accounts to take from. So in other words, you may have these generalized rules that say, well, first you use up your taxable dollars, and then because you want to take advantage of tax deferral, so you put that off until the last to take from that, and then tax-free from the very last be the money you'd want to touch last of all because it's tax-free growth. And the problem with that is that we need to balance out your overall tax. So an example would be, if I use up all my taxable dollars and I move to my tax deferred and all of a sudden it boosts me into a much higher tax bracket, then that's not necessarily in my best interest. If I balance these things out, I may be able to maintain keep myself in a lower tax bracket over my lifetime, which is going to be way more beneficial to me and give me even bigger tax savings by doing that. So again, it's a much more individualized situation and a little more complex than just saying you do this and this and this. All right, and we get into that, of course, with our clients as well. And then understanding when you pass, what's going to happen to your retirement accounts then? What have you set up? This gets into the combination things, beneficiary designations on your accounts, what those need to be, the legacy, the estate planning piece of that. If you've got a trust, how does that work with regard to beneficiary designations? And that can get real tricky, believe me, because we run into, over the last 30 years, I've run into all kinds of situations. But from that, and what's invaluable to you is that I've learned, okay, what the best way to do in terms of setting up your beneficiary designations, utilizing your estate planning, especially with trusts, how to use that to your best advantage with regard to your beneficiary designation. I'll share that with you a little more when we come back from this break. So join us here. I'll be right back on the Retirement Report.
Come to enjoy